Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Transgender Show. I'm very excited to be here with you all tonight because it is the 100th episode of the show. I can't believe we have made it this far. I can't believe how many episodes we've done in just under 2 years. And it's just been wonderful to have you all along with me on this wonderful journey. Tonight, I'm very excited because my guest is Grace Ann Hansen. Grace is a serial entrepreneur with multiple companies and careers under her belt, from restaurants to entertainment production to IT management. She's done it all. She is currently serving on the board of the Transformation Project, a nonprofit trans youth advocacy organization in South Dakota, recently chosen by Ariana Grande to receive $133,000 in matching funds to combat anti-trans legislation. So she's doing amazing things, and we're very excited to welcome to the show Grace Ann Hansen. Hi, Grace.
Hi.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to the 100th episode. It's great to have you here.
That's kind of crazy. When you emailed me and said that this was going to be the 100th show, I'm like, wow, that's kind of monumental.
Yeah.
This should be maybe this should be the musical version. Isn't that what some like TV shows do? They'll do the musical version of the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
For the special episode. But
well, luckily we do have the live thing. A lot of shows will do, their special live episodes. So we've got that. But the musical numbers is something we just did not have the staff to get around to do. Maybe for the 200th episode next year, we'll It's just crazy because last year in 2021, we actually did 51 episodes out of a possible 52. So we only missed one show all of last year. I think we're going to slow down the pace a little bit here in the future so that we can do things like that, like put together a musical episode.
Yeah, that would be fun.
That would be very fun. I'll put that down as a brainstorm idea for the future. Welcome in, everybody. It's so great to have y'all here. As Mitvani just asked there in chat or posted there, please ask any questions that you have for Grace or even myself, and post any comments that you would like for us to deliver to Grace. She can't see the chat right now while we're on the show live, but after the break, we will get to your comments and questions. I will make sure she hears them all, and we get through all of your questions. We are always able to get through everything that you ask. So don't be shy. Get them in. Anything is open field. Just go ahead. Those words didn't make sense, but anything is good. Ask your questions, and we'll get to them. That sentence is not something that I can put together in my brain today. I don't know why. So let's just go ahead and skip over that and get to the meat of this thing. I didn't mention in your profile, in your bio there, so please tell the audience how you identify and your pronouns.
I am she, her. I identify as a woman. I found as I've come along, even though I am transgender, I don't identify really as a transgender woman. I just identify as a woman because I found that the more that I assimilate, the less transgender has to do with it, and the more it's just being a girl.
Yeah. That's the dream, right? That's what we're all trying to get to.
Yeah.
Well, those of us on the trans feminine side of the equation.
That's right. That's right.
But basically just trying to get to the point where we don't have to identify and call out that we're trans. We're just able to be our identity. So we'll jump in and start with my favorite question. How did you choose your name?
Well, I was struggling with it for a while. And then the summer before I came out, I was at my parents' house and I came across my old baby book. And in the first few pages of my baby book, my mom had scribbled some names. And it was 3 boy names and 3 girl names. And she ended up using all 3 boy names. I have 2 brothers who are very cisgender. So, I mean, they'll keep using those. And then there were 3 girl names. And one of them was Gretchen. And that name was taken by my first cousin, who's only about 9 months younger than me, and I didn't think that would be very cool. The other was, let me get this out. They're all G names.
Okay.
They all start with G, every one of them. The other one was Jillian, the British Gillian. Well, I am married to a Jill, a Jill, so I thought that would be really in poor taste. And there was one left over that spoke to me.
Process of elimination.
And that was process of elimination. So I like to tell people that my mother named me.
That's great.
Although I also tell them that she gave me a choice. And I picked the one I liked the best.
Well, let's go ahead and jump to that. How has your mother's reaction been with that paying homage to the name that she had chosen? Is she warm to it, or have you struggled?
Yeah, she's been great. She was actually the very first person I came out to.
Wow. That's incredible to have that.
Yeah. I had more struggles with others in my immediate family than I've had with her. She's probably been the earliest, most supportive. I had, I've got 4 kids. I have a spouse. I have both my parents are alive. I have 2 brothers that are both alive, and she was the first one, and she's always been with me the entire time.
So when did you realize that you were trans, that was the identity that fit with you, that was the word to describe what you'd been feeling inside?
The word, about 10 years ago. The realization that everything was just messed up, kindergarten. I was a farm kid. We grew up on a farm. It was me and my brothers, and there were neighbor kids that lived a few miles away that we would visit, or they would come visit us once in a while. And every once in a while, we would hang out with our cousins at family functions. But I never had any extensive socialization with kids. So I was just me. And I never had to identify as anything when I was little until they started putting us in gendered groups in kindergarten. When, the first time that the boys and girls lined up to go to the bathroom, I tried to line up with the girls and quickly got corrected. And, for a good portion of my formative years, everything that I did that wasn't acceptable got corrected. So I was trained to act as I was expected to behave. So I always knew it was wrong. And I went through a lot of phases, and sometimes I was very in touch with that part of me, but couldn't show it to anyone else. Other times I would try to violently destroy that which was inside of me, and that resulted in depression, a bit of extensive alcohol use in my younger years, and it made life less than stable for me over the years. I mean, I'm 56 now, so I dealt with it for a long time.
I find that the training that we go through, fitting us into the square peg or the square hole, round hole, whatever it is, it's a square peg, round hole. There we go. The fitting into that round hole. There's so much of that training and so much of that is beaten into us that for a lot of us, when we do realize that we can transition, that this is what we've needed our whole lives, on the other side of things, it doesn't feel, it's in some ways it doesn't feel any better because you still feel like an odd person out. You don't have the training of the new gender. You don't have that stuff just kind of beaten into you. And did you struggle with some of that? Like once you were out and trying to live a feminine life, feeling like, well, I don't know how to do this.
I didn't have as much problem as those that lived in my household because I was definitely socially transitioning faster than they were comfortable with. Now it's not a thing. I mean, it doesn't ever come up as a thing. Now, rather than, are you really going to wear that? I get constructive criticism that, maybe that top isn't the right color for those leggings or whatever, it took a little bit. I mean, that I'm referring to my spouse in that respect.
Yeah.
But, my kids went through it too. When we would go to family events like birthdays or Christmas or whatever, I was really self-conscious. But I found over the last 3 years that I seem to have assimilated very well.
Nice.
And that's important to me. I have a great amount of sympathy for those of us transgender women who have a terrible time going out in public and getting clocked at every turn, right? It's just a terrible, terrible feeling. And then sometimes you're oblivious. And there came a time, I don't know, maybe this time last year, where being misgendered just didn't happen in public. The only people who misgender me are people that haven't had a lot of time with me since my transition, that knew me well before.
Yeah.
They're just trying to reform new habits, right? Because honestly, a lot of people don't even hear what they say. It's just a autonomic reaction, just like breathing or your heart beating. But for strangers, they address you based on what they see. And I haven't been misgendered in well over a year now.
Wow. Yeah.
And, it's easy to take for granted. I'll tell you that for sure. Because, I'll go a few months and then I'll be with a cousin or an old friend that has just seen me recently, and they'll mess up my pronouns 3 or 4 times in the same conversation. And then I realize how much it hits me because, oh my God, I haven't felt like that in months.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a definite dividing line between strangers and friends, family, and acquaintances who address you properly one way or not the other.
Have you found in just throughout your transition a greater tendency towards new groups that are meeting you as you or transgender groups that
a little bit,
that no versus hanging out with the old people that you knew before?
Well, here's the thing. There's a saying that men shouldn't have girlfriends unless they're his wife or his mother. And so before I came out, I really didn't have any close girlfriends. And I've developed a pretty strong core of cis girlfriends that I go out with, that I talk to every day, that I do things with, go shopping with. And, we've been pretty successful in our own household in understanding that now that our friend groups are of the same gender, we, we draw kind of a line between them because, it was pretty easy if you're really lazy to gravitate towards one spouse's friend group and then just hang on to their spouses, right? But that doesn't seem to work in this case. So we've adjusted that a lot. It took some time, but my very best friends are women. And I'll have to say, no intention to be discriminating or anything, but right now my entire friend group of friends that I hang out with and talk to every day, they're all cis women. So, I've got a large group of transgender women that are acquaintances. I have a workmate who's transgender, but we're not in a situation where we can go out to karaoke on Thursday night.
So you mentioned that from a very early age, you knew, you were aware that the gender that you were assigned was wrong, and you were dealing with that your entire life. And then it wasn't until 10 years ago that you kind of quit fighting it and understood that you were trans. Was there a period there where, because of all the fighting against it that you had done, that there was an adjustment period trying to accept that you were trans?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I knew what I was my entire life, but I didn't use the transgender word until I learned it about 10 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. So, prior to that, there was transsexual. And then there's then there's the ever popular daytime talk shows with, figure out which of these women is really a man kind of thing. And, they were either transsexuals or transvestites, and all of them just weren't said with any amount of warmth or acceptance. The first transgender person I ever saw on television was the tennis player, Renee Richards. It was a 60 minutes interview. I think I was 11 years old, maybe 10. And I knew that was me. But I felt that there was no way that I would ever, ever, ever be able to do what she did. It was both too scary, and I just couldn't imagine how anyone would ever go about it. But I knew if I had the choice, that would be me. And if I could be assured that I would survive the trauma of that with everybody I knew and my family and that kind of stuff, it's just, that was the first time I looked at someone else and said, oh my God, that's me.
Mm-hmm. And that gives you the spark of this is possible as well, right?
Yeah, that spark. We also had, somewhere a few years after that, there was a big interview with Tula. She was a transgender model in the 70s, I think. And, they were always like 16 minutes interviews. They weren't like regular entertainment. So they were like, really different. And they stuck out on their own in my memory as events. For me, anyway.
Mm-hmm. I just remember early on, as I was kind of, I don't know, as the foundation was being laid for me to understand that I was trans, I was responding to things that I would see or come across. And I was thinking that the thoughts and things that I suddenly felt about those were influencing my transition, or influencing my desire to transition, or in that kind of idea. Whereas it took me a long time to get on the other side of it and look back without the shame and guilt of feeling like, I've exposed myself to something that is making me this way, realizing, oh no, I've been this way all along, and those things appealed to me because of my predisposition to it. Did you find things like that as you were going through it?
Oh yeah. You know, my entire life I've always been emotional. I was always smaller than everyone else. I was a short kid. I reached 5'8", which is kind of average tall for a girl, but really pretty short for most guys. I mean, there's plenty of guys that are shorter, but still, you feel small around a lot of people. But that and the fact that I felt so uncomfortable in male company. Locker rooms. I played hockey as a kid. Going hockey bus. Oh my God. It was the worst place ever. Because boys are crass and mean, and they pick on people, and they just didn't think the way I thought. And as a result of that, I got picked on and shamed and all sorts of stuff as I grew up.
Mm. Yeah, that's a tough thing. And it was the same way for me, just not understanding how they thought, like not getting the thought process, the way that they looked at and talked about girls and some of the things. Just I couldn't understand why I couldn't understand it.
I know.
So,
and then after a while, I learned how to pretend.
Mm-hmm.
I laughed at all the right jokes, and I told some of my own because I heard somebody else tell them, so I could pass them off as original in my own environment. But yeah, I never understood it, not at all.
So you mentioned that the first person you came out to was your mom. Who was the most difficult for you to come out to?
My wife. We've been together for 33 years. We were friends for 3 years before that. Really good friends. And we've been married now. It'll be 27 years in July. And, I suppose it was about 5 weeks after I came out to my therapist. When I say it was my mom that I came out to first, it was really my therapist, but she didn't really count. And by that point in time, only 2 people knew. One of my children, who had kind of sussed it out because he's not very dumb, and he kind of figured it out. He caught me crying one day after I had talked to my mom, and wouldn't let it go until I told him what was going on. And then it was my wife, and I mean the first reactions were shock and anger, and because she didn't understand any of it. But to her credit, she took that and ran with it. And now she's probably one of the most well-educated cis people on transgender issues I've ever met. Her therapist is actually a WPATH certified psychologist, PhD, and she's probably the most well-recognized gender therapist in South Dakota. And that's my wife's therapist, not mine. And So my wife is very well educated, still dealing with some emotions some days, but I think the thing that saved us so far, I can't say that our marriage is saved because you never know what happens tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that saved us up to this point is the fact that we were such good friends before the first time we ever even dated. Because, you know, sexual relationship was not the basis of our relationship. And so it had nothing to do with being straight or gay or transgender or cis or whatever. You know, in a way, I've kind of come out in two areas since I came out to her. I also identify as queer, where most of my life I had identified as a cis het male, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but you know, my sexual attraction has a lot to do with how they see me as well. If you've ever seen those videos where people say, you know, guy sees me as woman, yes, guy sees me as man, no, you know, that kind of thing. I I really have a very open sexual preference as long as they view me as a woman. I don't care any other way.
Mm-hmm.
But I have my person, so it's not like I'm out trolling for a hookup or
Yeah.
anything. So
Other than the fact that you had such a really strong foundation of friendship and the fact that your wife found the best possible therapist, were there
yes,
other things that looking back that you were able to do, the two of you, or maybe you were able to influence that is kind of key, is something that we can kind of pass on to other people out there watching who are looking to come out to a spouse or significant other?
you have to be ready to be patient. I mean, when I told her I'd already made my decision to transition and I wanted to do it now. But when you bring something like this to your spouse, a spouse who never suspected anything, you know, there are some whose spouses know they've had gender issues for many years, and it's not so hard because they've prepared themselves for it. But when your spouse has had no preparation, no idea of the things that have gone on in your head for years, the biggest thing that is required on your part as the transgender person is to have patience, and as hard as it might seem, to develop empathy for how they're feeling. And honestly, that is the hardest thing, because I was so happy to get rid of who I was that I had a really, really hard time imagining how it must be for other people to lose that person that they thought they had.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle. I mean, I still struggle with it to some degree, but I've done a lot of work therapy wise, and you know, academically, I've read a lot of books about it.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that
But yeah,
a lot of the struggles you have pertain more to maintaining a long-term marriage like that? 27 years is a significant amount of time. Or do you think that there are still aspects of it that pertain particularly to the fact that you're transgender?
no, um, my relationship with her is just what it is. Um, you know, I've thought about this a lot. There's a there's a point in time, I think, in a strong marriage where sex, gender even, isn't as big of a deal. when you realize that that's your one person,
Mhm.
and the the person you can go to with, well, almost everything, um, but the person that you know and trust and have a shared history with, um, it becomes way less about gender. And she's admitted that as well. Although there are some, she's still struggling with some emotions about it. Um, I think that's one of the biggest things that she has a hard time with, is that she doesn't identify as lesbian,
Mhm.
and she has a hard time identifying herself as straight right now because of who she's married to. So that's a big struggle. I mean, when you grow up in a conservative state like we have, I mean, even though both of us are pretty liberal, it's it's a common it's a common thread, right?
Mhm.
That people people are who you think they are, I guess. Um, and so she has a really hard time adjusting to that expectation.
Well, that's a really interesting scenario where that I haven't heard of yet, where the spouse still identifies as cis hetero, even though their partner has changed, and it's interesting to have that space for her to still be able to identify that way, even in the context of your marriage and what
Right.
you've been through. I love that for her that she can still have that and honor that in herself.
I mean, like I said, it's not without its struggles,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, I think if anything, we we may end up just both identifying as queer, because then you don't have to really identify a lot of it.
Yeah, that answers the question and ends the conversation.
Yeah.
Going back to coming out, a question I love to ask is: did you have anybody that you came out to who supported you in a way that you weren't expecting or that surprised you?
Yeah. Um, if I look back on my entire life, I've really got one person who's a man who I can say is truly a friend. And that friendship didn't have anything to do with my involvement in music or my career, or, you know, all those work related friendships you end up getting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was the one and only guy that I could hang with, and it didn't matter whether who I was or who he was. He's just a good guy. And I was really afraid to tell him. You know, my entire immediate family knew by then. And I play in a band, and I was at the point where I needed to start telling people in the band, but I thought to myself, well, I can't tell anybody in the band until I've told him. And he's been the best. He's like, and our relationship has even changed. You know, when before, we've had each other on the back, now I hug him and snuggle my face into his chest, and it feels good because he's always been there for me. And it's just something that he's just rolled with it, and he's been so good to me.
It's very interesting that you pointed that last bit out of being able to hug and snuggle your head on his chest, like those little acts of pure femininity
Hmm.
that we sort of overlook. And I don't I'd have to think for a minute about the relationships with men that I, especially men that I knew before I transitioned, that I
Hmm.
would be able to do something like that and act like that. And that's a very beautiful thing to have that with somebody.
That's one thing I said earlier about assimilating well. It didn't take me long to adopt my feminine behaviors because they were always there.
Mhm.
I just kept cutting them off at the pass because I didn't want people to hate me.
Yeah.
And so it didn't take long for me to be that way. But yeah, there are still some people where I probably can't come up and just hug them like that, where it would be really weird for them. But it's not really weird for me and this one friend.
What part in your transition has community played, and what was it like for you at the beginning trying to find community, trying to find other people like you to talk to and get information from and find out, how do I do this?
Well, I'll have to say, just like everyone else says, social media is the thing that brings people together and makes the world smaller. Um, I discovered everyone's friend, suddenly Samantha on Instagram,
Mm.
and a few others um, that maybe aren't as famous, but are as helpful. And I've gotten together with Samantha a few times. One of my sons lives in Phoenix right now, so and that's her area. So we've had coffee, and she's what is she? 17 years younger than me, but she transitioned 4 years before I even thought it would be possible for me. So it's it's a thing that 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 I have to acknowledge that if it wasn't for social media, I don't think I would have found community. Um, in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, we've got a small community, but given the very conservative type of state we live in, with the with a wild bit of unacceptance, especially of trans people, I found that most trans people have a terrible time assimilating. Um, I think a lot of it is because of unacceptance. I think a lot of it is because they find it hard to get jobs because conservative people own businesses sometimes and don't want to hire those transgender people. I'm so lucky that I was employed by, at the time, and still am, by a company with a complete non-discrimination policy, and even an HR team whose job it was to help people who were coming out at work.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of places I could have been working, a lot of things I could have been doing where my transition would not have been as easy or as possible.
Mm.
So I find myself drawn towards people who've assimilated well because I feel that I've got something I can learn from them. I find myself drawn more as an activist for people who find it hard to assimilate. That's why I got involved in some of the nonprofits that I have, because I want to help people get to the point I'm at, where they don't have to think about being trans every time they walk out the door.
That's wonderful work, and I can't wait to get into that after the break.
Yeah.
Let's get a little philosophical here.
Okay.
What does transition mean to you?
Well, there are two ways to look at it. You can look at it as one day you're a man, the next day, oh my God, I'm a woman. And that is not transition. I mean, if you just think about the plethora of bills and mail a person gets in their mailbox every day, just the process of going through that and making it so that everything can reflect who you are, that's a part of transition. You know, getting my name changed, getting my gender marker changed on my driver's license, my passport, my birth certificate, all those things are part of transition. You can't just be one person one day and another person the next. You have to take steps towards it. Otherwise, it's just play acting, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way. And then there's both the transition of who people expected to see before to the person you want them to see now. And sometimes, like I said, if you move too fast, people rebel against it, and it makes it even harder. So, like I said before, you know, transition slow enough so that people can accept the changes. Even though you know, or I would know that, man, tomorrow I just wish this was all over and I could just be who I am and not have to worry about it. If I want to fit into society and into my family, I need to give them a little time to get with the program. So transition, I think, generally has more to do with those that are looking at you rather than those that you are looking at. Because once you've decided that you figured it out, I mean, there's nothing more anybody wants than to get there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I could have just flipped a switch and overnight been where I wanted to be, I would have done it, but there was no way for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So even if transition is a short period of time or a long period of time, you know, all those steps are transition. It's about a little bit of everything. It's about your interaction with others, others' interaction with you, you know, how the junk mail gets addressed. All that stuff is really important in getting through to the other side of it.
It's funny you bring up that that light switch kind of idea, and that was one of the things that got me to accepting the fact that I needed to transition. Was, you know, I
Right.
allowed myself to kind of do the thought exercise, and I repeated it many times. Like, if there could be a wizard that showed up and would instantly change me into a woman, but I couldn't go back, would I do it? And the answer that I always had, even though I asked myself multiple times just to make sure, was always absolutely yes. And it took me a while, but I still realized, well, if that's the case, if I absolutely would do it, then I should do it, even though it's slow and hard. And you know, I guess I just kind of put that out there for anybody watching, that, you know, some of these things will help you understand what is really going on inside of you and help you move forward, even though I was telling myself at the time, well, I don't need to transition. I don't need to do that. I don't hate my body. I don't, you know, I'm fine. Because I was still in that mode of, like we were talking about earlier, fighting it so hard, putting on that front, fitting into that role that we were given and we were supposed to be doing, and not honoring ourselves and what we needed. And, you know, so that's why I put that out there. Is like, I think that a thought exercise like that is really important to realize what it is you really truly want and help you figure that out. What were some of the key fears that you've had, that you've run up against in your transition, and how did you overcome those in yourself?
Um, in the beginning, the fear was about rejection and humiliation. there was a moment where I tried to kill myself way at the beginning. Trigger warning, sorry everybody. Luckily I didn't succeed. Apparently that's something I don't have very good skills with, which is probably a good thing. And the moment came and went, and as I reflected post-attempt, luckily I didn't end up in a hospital or anything, but it unnerved me so much that I'm like, okay, that's it. I can't avoid this anymore. I've got to do it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that jolt of adrenaline and that life-altering moment gets your brain revved up to the point where you can see yourself past all those fears just long enough to not be able to go back on yourself. Mm-hmm. Which is what I did. I tried to play chicken with a semi-truck. Not a good idea, by the way. And then drove my car off into the ditch, through a fence, and into a cornfield. Or soybean field, sorry. Where I sat for an hour and cried. And nobody on the road up there stopped once ever to see if I was okay. Which really kind of bothers me to this day. But it's something that I mark as the point in which I decided that there was no not doing this. If I wanted to live, I had to transition. Because I knew I would put myself through that situation all over again if I didn't. And all of the fears that I had my entire life, almost none of them happened. I didn't get kicked out of my house. My children and my spouse didn't reject me. I mean, granted, there were some emotional heartache amongst this. The rest of my immediate family, my brothers and my parents, have been pretty good. I got one brother and one dad who, while they use my name and my pronouns, they will absolutely not talk about the transgender thing because that's just too weird. But when you're kind of stuck in that manly mold, those are the same guys also that can't give the birds and the bees talk to their children. So it's okay. Mm-hmm. But they respect me and it's good. And I see them at every holiday. And so it's okay.
At least you have a peaceful family life there then.
It's peaceful. Yeah. It's peaceful, yes. And extended family, cousins, aunts and uncles, I've had a lot of support. And those that apparently don't support me, I just don't hear from.
Mm-hmm. That's been the greatest thing is the people that don't just kind of fade into the background, and the people that do come forward and are supportive of you out loud.
When people who don't agree with with your transition just ghost you, that's probably the kindest thing they could do in response to it, rather than coming at you with torches and pitchforks. If they just ghost you and leave well enough alone, I can respect that.
Have your goals shifted as you've moved through your transition? Like when you set out to do it, did you have a plan in mind that somehow changed?
Yeah, in fact, one of the first things I did with my therapist was I made a list that we titled "Put a Pin in It," because I was so wrapped up in getting to the end at that point, wanting to just flip a switch, right? That she wanted me to do my research and figure out how long it would take for each of those goals to happen, and so we came up with a whole list of things, starting from changing my name, to getting new IDs, to transitioning at work, coming out to the general public as opposed to assorted little groups of people. We discussed the ideas of breast augmentation or facial feminization surgery or bottom surgery. And we gave them all imaginary dates that had, some basis in reality, in what could be accomplished in certain amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I've passed on breast augmentation at this point because I have some, and it's all mine, and it's kind of nice. My face is still continuing to change due to hormone replacement therapy, so I'm not going to visit facial feminization until I see how it ends up.
Mm.
Given that I'm 56, I can't look like a 26-year-old model, but I have to accept the age that I am. But I think I wear my age pretty good right now. And then there's bottom surgery, which is something I am pursuing. And as part of that process, there's psych evals and all sorts of other stuff. I have been through my psych evals, and on June 1st, I believe, I get to see the surgeon and the endocrinologist at Mayo Clinic for the first time to see, to have them evaluate me and set a schedule, I guess. So that's coming around, and I'm excited and a little scared, but who wouldn't be? It's pretty significant.
Yeah, that is. Congratulations on that. That's very big.
Yeah. But yeah, I had a plan. I've added things to the list. I've taken things off the list. I've moved things around. I've set things aside. Yeah, it changes a little bit all the time, depending on what you really need versus what you can live with, what you can live without. I didn't bank on my facial changes being as significant as they were. So I had it in my mind right off the bat that I was going to need facial feminization surgery, but so far it's been pretty good.
Nice.
I think I could use a little bit of a lift here, though, but that's really not the point.
Yeah, that like you said, as those of us that transition later in life, it starts to become what if it is feminization, what if it is just age? The examples that we get off of Instagram.
Rejuvenation.
Yeah, rejuvenation. Are there things that you feel you've been able to accomplish in your life because of your transition?
Yeah, I honestly, yes. I'm currently on the board of 3 nonprofits, one of them that has nothing to do with transgender things, but it's a, I don't know, maybe I look more stately like this. I don't know. Being a board member, oh my gosh. It's made me it made me rethink how I looked at careers and life. I think a lot of people who've transitioned later in life, say late 30s to my age, a lot of them have commented about how they found that the only way to prove that they were who everybody thought they were, the only way to be a man is to check off all these boxes. And I spent a lot of my life checking those boxes as well. And inevitably, it didn't really help me. And it got me stuck in a lot of paths that I really didn't want to go down. But being on these boards and being able to help other people is something that has become more important to me now than it was before. And so I think really it's just my change in mindset has allowed me to do things other than what I was doing before. Mm-hmm. And has allowed people to view me differently because of my change in my outlook on life. So it's really helpful.
That's beautiful. So as we close this section up, what advice do you have to give to young or closeted trans folks out there?
The thing that I've come across the most, and the thing that has helped me the most, is that I absolutely know my story. If you don't know your story, there's no way you're going to be able to convince those around you that you truly feel the way you feel and why you feel that way. Because sometimes it's not just a matter of people accepting you. Sometimes it does end up being a matter of convincing people that you really know what is in your head and what you're thinking and how you're feeling. And so I've always told kids that I work with the Transformation Project, for instance, just know your story. It requires you to be hyper aware of yourself and to look through your life and see what those things were that influenced you to do what you've done and how you ended up where you are. So it's very important for a person to know their own story and make it understandable for others.
It's interesting because that involves a level of self-exploration I think some of us might be kind of afraid of because,
really
one of the fears we all struggle with is, am I trans enough? Am I feminine enough? Yada, yada.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really examine it, then you're having to pull into question some of those things.
Yep. It's a very tough thing for me to ask of people, but it's something that's very important.
Well, Grace Ann Hansen, stumbled on the name in the last bit there. It's been wonderful having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me.